Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Maywood on Diversity Today Media. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff, your host, and joining me at this moment is Mr. Terrence Hollingsworth, investment advisor. Terrence, how you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dr. Ratliff?
I'm good, my brother. It was a good day today, man. How's the stock market looking these
Yeah,
days?
we're in, really a short-term rally. The market broke the 50-day moving average, which is a short-term indicator, a couple of weeks ago, and we really have been rallying ever since. We're still digesting inflation, but overall, I think we're sitting in a good place. Going forward, we're starting to see gas prices coming down,
Yes.
and that what we learned was as interest rates were starting to kind of go tick higher and all these other things, it really was inflation that was making the difference for everyday people. And so, hopefully gas prices are going to come down more. Hopefully inflation comes down more. And the one thing that's the same is people spend the same. So,
Right.
it's keeping the economy going.
Absolutely. Well, it is like you mentioned, like particularly the gas prices, man. I mean, it's crazy how high they were, the national average being as high as it was a few weeks ago. And now you see it steadily coming down, which is a good sign. And I think about, Maywood, for example, those who are, trying to balance their finances with just mortgage, rent, and gas and food and take care of the children. This is the summer. So, for some parents, they have to battle with daycare and things like that. It's a lot, so I'm glad to see there's a short victory on Wall Street.
Yeah, the one thing that's true, and it's unfortunate, but as inflation has come in, people are pulling back, the disposable spending, if you want to call investment disposable spending, at the time when the market has been probably some of the best opportunities by big name companies like Amazon and Meta, which is Facebook. Um, these have been phenomenal prices, except, people haven't been taking advantage of it as much. And, that's unfortunate.
These are some of the things that we talk about during our virtual financial education class. We definitely encourage, our students, our scholars to invest. And so we have it, as you see on the screen, every Thursday at 5:30 Central Standard Time. And it's an hour. It's an hour of your time. Terrence is an expert in investments and giving advice on wealth management. And I encourage everyone out there who's watching this podcast to tune in. If you're interested, contact us. You saw it on the screen. It'll come back up by the end of the podcast. Reach out to me and I'll send you a link to access the class. And we have a lot of great discussions, as you see there. So we look forward to you joining us. And thank you all for your support.
Yeah, so last week we did something really interesting. We talked about Warren Buffett and the type of investor Warren Buffett is, and can we duplicate that? It was a great conversation. Tomorrow, what we're going to talk about is real estate, though,
Mm-hmm.
because we're literally going to do a case study. People talk about, especially in the Black and Brown community, that real estate is the way to get, gain wealth and things like this. Well, let's look at it. Let's look at the data. Let's see if you put them side by side. If you put a certain amount of money in the market versus putting a certain amount of money in the real estate, which way do you come out better? So the data is the data. It's going to be real interesting, and I hope you guys join us.
Looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to this conversation we're about to have. Young man who is very entrenched in Maywood politics. His name is Trustee, I should say the Honorable Trustee um, Miguel Jones. Trustee Jones grew up in Maywood. He's a native Maywoodian. He grew up on 12th and St. Charles Road. He went to Washington Elementary School, so he is a Wildcat. So he said his house is a beeline to Washington. He also attended Walther Lutheran High School, where he graduated, and he was a student athlete making all state in track and field. Trustee Jones went on to attain a Bachelor in Science degree in accounting at the College of Business at Illinois State University. Go Redbirds. Trustee Jones is committed to community involvement and advocacy. He's held several leadership roles, including chapter president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and serving as vice president of the National Association of Black Accountants. And Trustee Jones is currently senior accounting finance professional in the wireless industry while still serving his hometown community in this official capacity. He was elected to the Maywood Board of Trustees in 2019, and he has sincerely has his presence felt beyond the village that he represents. He's committed to local rebranding strategy, which has led to creative collaborations, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, with various governing bodies, border and community leaders, and prominent Maywoodians. And he is very active with the instruction of the basketball court at Connor Heiser Park, which is named after fellow Maywoodians Glenn Doc Rivers, who everybody in Maywood should know about. He's also recognized as a Village Free Press 2020 Person of the Year. And without further ado, I'd like to bring on the Honorable Trustee Miguel Jones. Trustee Jones, how are you this evening?
Dr. Ratliff, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for joining us. I'm certainly glad to have you.
No, thank you, and thank you for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be on and talk Maywood.
Absolutely. Well, those distinguished honors are well earned, and being a fellow Maywoodian, I always ask rhetorically, of course, has anything good came out of Maywood? The answer is absolutely yes. There's a litany, a plethora of young brothers, young sisters, but in this case, young brothers like yourself, who has matriculated through higher academia, connected to Maywood directly as well as indirectly to get to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I like to do is talk a little bit about Miguel Jones. Who is Miguel Jones? We all know that you grew up in Maywood. So what is Miguel Jones' story? What motivated you to get this far in your journey?
Yeah, so, I'll start a little bit about, my background. So as you mentioned, born and raised in Maywood, literally born at Loyola Hospital. So I like to, brag that I, literally, started off my life in Maywood. Aside from college, I've spent most of my life, living in the community. So, as you mentioned, I went to Washington School, played basketball, played volleyball, loved District 89 athletics. And, it was a great time, met some great teachers, some that, changed my life forever. Most notably, I think about Mr. Mobley and Miss Watts. Graduated from there. I went to high school at, as you mentioned, Walther Lutheran, which is now known as Walther Christian Academy. And then even Washington School now, which is Washington Dual Language Academy. But, I, went to Walther, which is a very diverse school. And, I was able there to really learn how to become a people's person in terms of dealing with people from different diverse backgrounds and different communities. Not only just Maywood and the Proviso Township, but there are people that lived in DuPage County and Oak Park, River Forest, you name it. So, I was fortunate enough to, play sports. I played 3 sports in high school: football, track and field, and basketball. So, from there, I was able to just learn how it is to be on a team and what it is for everyone to be on one accord, looking to, get the W. So, I had a, great time there. Went on to college, went to Illinois State University, majored in accounting. My college experience was amazing. I had a great time. I got a lot of studying in. I got probably a little bit more partying in.
Right.
But, I met some great people. I joined a frat, so shout out to Alpha Phi Alpha. You mentioned that already. Ada Tau chapter. And now I'm part of the alumni chapter called Rosetta Lambda, which is based out of Maywood. Nice. And so those gentlemen do a lot of work in terms of with our youth and advocacy for young men, particularly of color, but all young men, that they're growing up to be great contributors to society. So I mentioned went to Illinois State, graduated with an accounting degree, And I was fortunate enough, I ended up getting a job offer the semester before I graduated. And so that contributed to the partying because I already knew I had a job. The only requirement is I needed to graduate.
Right.
So I got straight C's my last semester in college because I'm like, oh, I'm about to do just enough to get up out of here.
Hold on, they call that senioritis, right? When the
Yeah,
last
yeah. So I wouldn't recommend anyone else doing that because that was risky. But so I started off my career. I've been doing accounting for 12 years, corporate accounting. And again, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about numbers, how to read financial statements, how to talk to business partners outside of accounting, sales teams, and reading contracts and
nice.
making sure that our financials are accurate and timely. And that has helped me out in my career and some of these other capacities that I've been able to, participate in. And I just recently, started in the finance space. So now I'm doing more budgets and forecasting and working with leadership in terms of our strategic plan and how we can use our resources most effectively. So, I've gotten some great experience, and that's afforded me now to where I've got here. Did you want me to speak? Well, if I could speak briefly, so how that works in Maywood. So how I became a trustee real quick. So I actually I lived in Chicago with some of my frat brothers a couple years after graduating. So we lived in Chicago in like the West Loop area. And something was calling me back to Maywood.
Right.
And me and my roommate just decided that we were going to just go separate ways. We just wanted to, it wasn't any hard feelings. We just like, it's time to get our own space. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna move back to Maywood.
Right.
So I moved back and I knew I wanted to participate in some capacity. So I started going to village board meetings. At the time, Mayor Perkins was the mayor. After about my second board meeting, I walked up to her and said, hey, I want to get involved. I'm enthusiastic. Here's my background. What do you think? So she got back to me about a week or so later, and she was like, hey, we have an opening on the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. You should think about maybe, being a commissioner.
Right.
So I pursued that. The board passed it. So I started getting involved in that. I also started getting involved as far as an ad hoc member of the Maywood Fest committee. And that's where I started, having just a growing passion for leadership in the town. And then probably a little bit before that, I ran into Trustee Brandon at the barbershop.
Isaiah Brandon,
yeah. I ran into him at the barbershop, and we just had a great conversation about Maywood and some of the needs. And that's where I realized that for the impact that I wanted to have, I needed to be on the village board. And so we were talking, and he was like, hey, we should run on a slate. And I figured out what a slate was.
Right.
I'm like, okay, that's cool. And I was fortunate enough in 2019 to, be elected into the role. And that's where I am now. And, my background has, afforded me to be the finance chair and just contribute in different aspects to the community. So that's how I got started and how I landed where I am now.
Fantastic. It sounded like the seed was planted and, your roots were planted in the village of Maywood. And, you said something, a couple things besides the senioritis part, but you did finish. So, you distinguish the difference between accounting and finance because those are two different worlds, even though in some spaces they cross. But I'm glad you were able to differentiate between the two. But even in returning to Maywood, there are a lot of people who have that desire to return to Maywood. There's something about the village of Maywood and the homogeneous society of living in the village of Maywood, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's the people, that make the community. It's the diversity. I even thinking about the Proviso Weiss alumni picnic that just happened.
Oh yeah.
And one of the great things that I liked about it, outside of just the amount of people that were there, was the diversity of our community. You had classes that went back to the 50s.
Wow.
And you didn't see a lot of Black people at their section. And I think that kind of speaks to how diverse the community was and still is. And then when you think about now, Maywood, was predominantly a Black community, probably from like the mid 60s on. And now, we're very diverse. There's a large Hispanic community, or, a of people in our community right now. And so we're very diverse. And I think that it's something that we need to lean on as we talk about what our brand is. It's a
Right.
very diverse community with a lot of people that have contributed a lot to the fabric of what we call Maywood.
You talked about branding. And so, one of the things I want to ask you is about, you being a brand, you being a trustee, serving on the board of trustees. And so just getting right into it, using your financial expertise in the world of finance and accounting, there's something that was passed by the Biden administration, President Biden administration, called the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA, as far as acronyms are concerned. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that will benefit the village of Maywood in terms of the vision with the money?
Yeah, so to speak about ARPA specifically, so that was resources that we received from the federal government, as you mentioned, with the idea that it would be used as to help alleviate the impact that we had from COVID-19. And
Mm-hmm.
so within those guidelines, we were given benchmarks in which we're allowed to use those resources. So it could be for infrastructure improvements. It can be for employee, salary compensation. It could be used for our residents. It could be used in the space of like tourism,
Okay.
a bunch of business improvement. It's really based on the feedback that we get from the community and the feedback that we get from staff on how we're going to utilize those resources. So now we're in the process of delivering getting all of the input that we need necessary to get the proper buy-in to know how we're going to allocate these resources and the timing of that. And, and then also working with engineering and these other folks to think about best use of it.
Right.
So it's about $3.1 million.
Okay.
And, it is a significant amount of money, but it's also something where, you can spend it on one thing. So for instance, people talk about Washington Boulevard, for instance, like that project is, don't quote me on this, but I'm sure it's in the millions and millions of dollars. It's more than $3 million to do that. So
right.
That's one of the considerations that we want to do too. So what's the best use of it? And, we're going to figure that out. But in terms of how that works in our rebranding strategy, I would say, going back to the people of Maywood, we have a global presence. When I think about some of the people that have come, from our community,
yes,
notably, let's say Chairman Fred Hampton. I was able to travel to Ghana last year, and people know who Chairman Fred Hampton is.
Amazing.
And I think about the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. I think you mentioned Doc Rivers at the beginning. He's a head coach of a NBA professional basketball team.
76ers.
There's just so many people that have come from our community and so many things that our community represents that we have to use that as our branding strategy of how we incorporate into our culture to make the community understand like this is who we are, and we can't let the media and let negativity brand our community. We have to use our resources and where we are to establish our brand. And where we are, we're not the west side of Chicago. We're a suburb,
right?
We're a suburb in Cook County, but we're not the west side, and we have to operate as if we're a suburb.
Absolutely.
Surrounded by other nice suburbs, and you have to make sure that we're fitting into that mold if you want to really tap into the economics of what's going on.
Absolutely. Trustee Jones, you were talking about, the negativity, trying to make sure that does not permeate inside the village of Maywood, that we are working together, that we are strong. We're trying to build, even just starting off with that $3 million through ARPA. But, there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of division amongst the board members. And we see this, in person. We see this virtually. There's no mistake what's going on from the top in terms of the mayor and the arguments and just the disagreements. And, for older people such as myself who grew up in Maywood in the 60s, 70s and things like that, it's hurtful to see that. And I'm sure it is for you, you're younger than myself, but those who are even millennials, it's hurtful to see that And we're thinking this is not the Maywood that we grew up knowing. And
Mhm.
so, my question for you is from the inside, because you're inside as the trustee, how can we get through this season of separation that's taking place? We know what's going on with the legalities of, the mayor and things like that. But in spite of that, there's still that division. How do we work through this? How do we get past this so we can start getting back to looking at the residents in the village holistically again?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think outside of resources being Maywood's biggest need, from my perspective, I think our culture is probably, if resources is 1A, our culture is 1B in terms
Mhm.
of what could be most impactful to improving our community. So let me just talk from the village board perspective.
Absolutely.
So, when we get elected, from what I've seen, and I'm a new, local official. Once we get elected, I think we are sometimes left alone to make a lot of decisions just amongst ourselves,
Mhm.
and which I think that's the expectation. But I would say it's about really being able to galvanize the people to get the input necessary so everyone's bought in. So when we do make the decisions, everyone feels good about it. And I guess I'll use an example. If you hire someone, like, let's say you want to build a new house,
Right.
and if you hire like a contractor, you wouldn't hire them and then just kind of walk away. And then when they call you and say the house complete, you just kind of do a walkthrough. I
Right.
think there has to be constant communication between the citizenry and the people that represent them, in terms of when we say we're going to do something, we're on the campaign trail, that we're being not only held accountable, but you're also walking through you're walking with us in terms of the nuances that come up in terms of some of the things that we say that we want to do, because it helps get more buy-in.
Right.
And then usually a lot of that buy-in comes in from, it used to be our citizen-led commissions and committees where the citizens would serve on these commissions and committees, or there's grassroots organizations that then let us know what their needs are. And we
Yeah.
still have that, but I think we have to think about more effective ways to communicate so everyone is getting the proper buy-in. Because sometimes it feels like, like I'm the contractor and I really haven't been, I mean, not just about the complaining part, but
Right.
we're
Right.
really figuring this out step by step.
Right.
To kind of say, hey, if you want the street on your, you want your street paved, or you're looking for some of these things to improve, us kind of figuring it out together as a community, versus sometimes it feels like we're just kind of left to bicker amongst ourselves. And
Mhm.
of course, the board does have a responsibility to be professional and to figure it out. But ultimately, who sits on that board is determined by the citizens. So the
Right.
citizens ultimately create the game plan. And
Yeah.
so when the game plan isn't working, the citizens have to step up and say, okay, this isn't working, and they have to be engaged enough to be able to say, okay, here's why,
Mhm.
and being able to talk to, because really we work for the citizens. So we're really
Mhm.
a microcosm
Yeah.
of what's happening in our community. And I think sometimes people take that the wrong way. And I don't mean that to be an insult, but
Sure.
it's really because there's a disconnect
Yeah.
between expectations and what's going on. And, lastly, I would say, our emails and phones need to be blowing up all the time,
Mhm.
especially with all the stuff that's going on. We need to be hearing from you all. You guys need to be asking, okay, so what's going on with this and that? And, what can they do to support us? And so
Mhm.
I think that's how you create a culture where the community, where the community is solving the problems, not just 7 people sitting on the dais.
Right. Great point. I want to ask you this question directly. You've seen previous mayors growing up, as far as Mayor Freelon, Mayor Connor, Mayor Williams, Mayor Perkins, just the history of mayor and how the functions of the government took place. And it seems as though for the most part, they listen to the citizen. You mentioned there was a citizen board. Maybe there needs to be more attention paid to that. My question is, has the board forgot about the citizens, even inclusive of the village manager being hired and then just recently terminated? Have the board, in the midst of this division, even listened to the citizens, aside of the public speaking forums during the meetings? Have they really been in tune with the citizens to try to take some type of action to move forward?
You know, So let me speak from my perspective.
Sure.
I think the board listens to the community in terms of what their concerns are. I think what happens is we're maybe not as transparent about
Mhm.
how we're arriving to the solutions that we're trying to get to. And I think again that happens from, I think some people are just on different agendas and different timelines. So
Yeah.
these things aren't necessarily vetted the way that they should be.
Right.
I think people listen, but again, it goes back to that, like, again, if you tell me, we'll go back to the contractor house example. If you say, hey,
Right.
here's how I want my house designed, well, you got to follow up with me in 2 weeks and say, okay, so like, how's it going on this part and that part? And, did you run into any roadblocks or anything? Because what was going to happen, he might say, oh yeah, I was going to do your design, but then code came out and said you couldn't do this and that. So I just went ahead and did it because, we hadn't talked. So
That's
I think there has to be that connection. Just our civic engagement in general, people have to understand is very similar to whether it be your teachers
right.
and those other people that your employer, your boss. Like, you have to make sure that you are prioritizing, maybe it's once a week, where that you are
Mhm.
engaging with your representatives and you
Absolutely.
understand what's going on, and that's how you ultimately hold them accountable. Because every 4 years at an election, usually it's too late and things have already been done. So
Right.
I would say, yes, we listen, but we have to come up with more ways and to be intentional about taking that feedback and being able to also, because you get 20, we have 25,000 residents.
Right.
What can we do to consolidate that to where we can say, okay, here's the priority, here's what's important, and
Yes.
here how we're going to manage it, and be transparent in terms of, okay, we're going to do Washington Boulevard, but
Hmm.
it's not going to get done to here, and
Right.
then explain why, because people, they
Right.
understand how it
Oh yeah.
works, but you have to be transparent and you have to give them an opportunity to put that feedback in.
Well said. And I love your house example, your contracted house example. Very well put. I want to give you there. I wish there was more time we had. Unfortunately, we're running short, but I do want to give you a few moments to make a final statement to your constituents. And, I appreciate you coming on our podcast this evening. This floor is yours.
Well, I want to say, Dr. Ratliff, thank you for the opportunity to, be on your show. I want to encourage people to, listen in and, to recommend certain people that you want to hear from to join. But, I would say what I would want to say to the residents of Maywood is, stick in there with us. There is a lot of good that's happening in our community, despite some of the articles and some of the negative information that has been out there in certain things. There's a lot good going on. I think Maywood is in a very unique situation with, for instance, our leadership. I think about the Speaker of the House right now, Chris Welch, and the Senate Majority Leader, and our Cook County Commissioner. These people are truly advocating for our community, and we need to have all hands on deck in terms of making sure that we do not miss out on the resources that our community so desperately needs. And then from there, we need all hands on deck in terms of how do we use these resources to improve our community. Outside of that, I just want to let people know that I'm available. If they ever want to speak to me, my village cell number, I'll say it real quick, is area code 708-288-8604. Feel free to call me or text me at any time. But, ultimately, we have to do this together. And, we are in a great position to do it. But we need all hands on deck. And everyone has to schedule out a time. I want to challenge everyone to make sure that civic engagement, whatever that means to you, whether it means being a volunteer on some youth football league or
Mhm.
Parent teacher association at a high
Mhm.
school, whatever, everyone has to participate in creating the conditions in which they want their community to look like. And if we
Absolutely.
do that, I promise you Maywood is going to be on the move.
It takes a village. It does. And thank you so much, Trustee Jones. We would like for you to come back in the near future. So thank you so much for partaking in this podcast. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. We do hope that you would like us on Facebook and YouTube. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff, and this is Let's Talk Maywood on Diversity Today Media. Be blessed and have a good night.